Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode in my series reviewing and recapping every single book in the Animorphs series. Today we are talking about Animorphs 41, The Familiar. From the cover we can see that this is a Jake book, and when I initially saw this I got very excited because, as we can see, Jake appears to be morphing into a human. Does this mean we are finally breaking the Animorphs taboo of morphing into other human beings? Time will tell. I also want to acknowledge I haven't got my lights on today. It's too warm. And otherwise this video isn't getting filmed, so excuse the somewhat weird lighting. It was this or there's no Animorphs, okay? We open with Jake slamming a Hork-Bajir on the ground, planning to rip its throat out. If you want a recap on all of those different words, by the way, just watch the playlist. I'll link it. Just watch it. It'll catch you right up. Things go less than great for Jake as the Hork-Bajir shoves him onto the ground and tries to, gore him, and he's also stuck on some hot pipes. That makes the adrenaline kick in, as you might imagine, and Jake gets in the zone and deals with that Hork-Bajir. Where are they, you ask? Well, they are underground, underneath a high-rise, which explains why there are hot pipes. Jake dispatches that Hork-Bajir and looks around to see that the others are also kind of totally surrounded, but he can't help because there are now 5 Hork-Bajir advancing on him. He spies what surely must be an exit and yells at everyone to get out of there. Marco says he can smell other troops coming, maybe some Taxons. Rachel's trying to fight despite looking worse for wear even for a grizzly, and almost goes down, except Cassie and Marco pull them off her. The Hork-Bajir descend on Jake now, and all seems lost until Axe's tail blade saves them. Even then, Jake has to be told to duck as another blade-armed boy joins the fight. A steam pipe bursts, filling the room with uncomfortable, scalding steam, but it does give the Animorphs the opportunity to escape. Jake throws himself at the door of the parking garage, and finally the door starts to open. As it rises up, the Animorphs leave, smallest morphs first. "I'll kill them," it was Rachel's voice, raving like someone possessed. "Get your hands off me, Marco. I'll kill them. I'll kill them." "Shut the door, Jake," Marco roared. "There are more on the stairs." Rachel is in full warrior princess mode and Marco won't leave her behind. He tells to Jake, "Don't hold the door. The two of us will find another way out. There are no other ways out." Jake has a moment of indecision, unsure who to save, himself or his friends. As a Hork-Bajir runs at him, he slides under the door and presses the emergency close switch. Cassie's wolf eyes fixed on me. "What are you doing? You can't trap them in there. You can't leave them." As the door closes, one of the Hork-Bajir does an Indiana Jones slide under the door and goes to attack them. The door is almost closed as they take the Hork-Bajir down, and Jake can see Marco dragging Rachel out of there. Axe tries to wedge a pipe in the door to keep it open, but whoever built this, kudos to them because it continues to close, bending the pipe. Thankfully, Gorilla Marco has enough strength to wrench the door up, get the two of them out of there, and then close it again, trapping the Hork-Bajir inside. They run out of there demorphing so as not to die from their copious wounds. They emerge, well, the humans emerge anyway, onto a busy street. Cassie stops in the road in the middle of a panic, and after all of that, almost just gets killed by an ordinary car. "4 of them," she said anxiously. "I may have killed 4 back there, maybe 5. She searched my eyes, her usual calm shattered. "Jake," she whispered. "How do I deal with this?" Cassie's argument/dilemma is that every day that they continue this fight, they become more like the Yeerks that they are trying to fight. Jake says to himself, "I genuinely do not have the energy to deal with this today. I cannot help you through this existential crisis, Cassie." Cassie has a cry, and Jake knows in his heart that he really needs to deal with this, but he just walks away. On the one hand, ow, and on the other hand, he knows he can't help, and I respect that. Ahead of them, Rachel and Marco are arguing because Rachel's convinced she could have taken down more Hork-Bajir, and Marco is convinced that she would have died. At just the right time, Axe in human morph emerges from behind a dumpster and tells them he hasn't heard from Tobias yet. But they can see a raptor overhead, and Rachel morphs and goes to see him, because as we know, Tobias has been having kind of a rough time since he was captured and tortured by the Yeerks. Axe wonders if they ought to meet in the barn to debrief the next day. Jake says he doesn't know. Axe, can you just make sure Cassie gets home okay? It's an emotional couple of chapters for sure. Jake flies home and in his exhaustion makes a risky demorph in the tree outside his house. Obviously risky because inside his house is a controller who doesn't know he's one of the Animorphs. He debates going into the garage to change into his normal, non-skin tight, non-morphing clothes, but opts again, "I'm too tired, it'll probably be fine," and of course immediately runs into Tom, the controller brother. "Hey," I said, forcing a half smile, I was over at Marco's watching the game. It went into overtime and, well, Detroit scored and Marco jumped up and smacked a Pepsi all over my jeans and sneakers. I left them there to get washed." A great lie that Tom seemingly buys and just tells Jake he looks kind of stupid in his lycra outfit. Jake trips his brother up, Tom trips Jake up in a brotherly banter segment that is all illusion. Did Tom really buy the lie? He seems kind of suspicious as after Jake goes into his room, he pops his head round to say, "Hey, is that blood on your leg?" Of course that was just a bike accident. Another fantastic lie from Jake. Tom let it go. But when I glanced once more at my bedroom doorway, Tom's shadow was still there. Did he have something more to say? I was too tired to ask. Sleep was dragging down my eyelids. Whatever it was, it could wait till morning. Jake has a dream that he stands on one side of a wall, through which there is a hole and water is spilling through, and he is pushing his hand against it to stop it. I wonder if it's a metaphor of sorts. An alarm clock sounds, waking Jake up. But it's not his normal alarm clock. I was staring into a triangular screen, a flat computer panel mounted flush in a peeling white plaster wall across from the bed. Eerie copper letters pulsed at the top of the glowing grey screen. 5:58:16 a.m. Below the time flashed the words, to do, and a single entry, report to work. Well, this is intriguing. Jake wakes up sharpish and tries to leave the small room he's found himself in, but a computer voice tells him he is not prepared to leave yet. If I could have something like that would help me remember my keys, that would be ideal. While pounding on the door to try and get out, Jake realises his hands are bigger than they ought to be and with different calluses to what he has. He looks at his reflection in the steel door frame and sure enough, he's an adult man with a beard. It's still definitely Jake, but at least 10 years older. Jake runs through the options in his head. Of course, this could be the Ellimist, but normally he'd have announced himself by now. It could be the Yeerks, but then what does this mean? So his conclusion is that he must have finally had a psychotic break and he is now in hospital. Leaping into the next chapter where we get the room described, we learn that this probably isn't a hospital because the room just doesn't feel hospital-y. There's a fancy space-age bathroom, there's a breakfast machine that produces bacon and eggs, again I would like one of those. A window is revealed and he looks out to see what looks like a normal city, except it's had kind of parasitic alien additions made to it, and in this kind of series, parasitic is never a good word. He sees two Yeerk fighters fly by across the skyline in which he recognises a lot of buildings, including the World Trade Center. This book was published in the year 2000. So, we know Jake is in New York, but there are bug fighters in the open. The alarm sounded again. Facility air quality jeopardised. The computer voice was more authoritative now. The window cover began to shut, closing off my sliver of city. Jake stops the window from closing, presumably just with his hand. I hope it's not the garage door opener guy's work. And he realises that it was two Yeerk fighters and an Andalite ship, but it sort of looks a little bit wrong. The computer tells him he has idled long enough and needs to get to work, and Jake finally makes the conclusion that he is in a world where the war is over, but the Animorphs didn't win. Finally, the cell ejects Jake, and he resists the urge to grab every single person who is also walking out of this facility and ask them what on earth is going on, opting instead to blend in. He follows the other humans in their brightly coloured jumpsuits as he goes about his day. They step out of the building into some kind of docking bay where another computerised voice tells Jake to get a move on as he's stopping everyone else from going. It's classic speedy futuristic city transport where everyone gets zipped off to different parts of the city. Jake gets into what seems like a modded bug fighter turned into a subway car and zips off. A seatbelt gets stuck on him the moment he sits down, which I like as a detail. "Hey, SAC 24-1275, a male voice was friendly. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I flinched, but turned. A guy in a green suit strapped to the seat to my left stared at me with icy blue eyes. Green suit was talking to me. My heart hammered. My head began to pound. "When's the launch?" he said. Before Jake can figure out an answer to that question, all the people in green suits get off at the next stop. And Jake has to come to terms with the fact that the guy in the green suit called Jake by a Yeerk name. They fly on or travel past the Chrysler building, which has some sort of big silver balloon stuck to it. All while Jake is trying to work out if he has a Yeerk in him or not. Thankfully, Jake has had one before and concludes, no, probably not. Jake tries to ground himself by repeating to himself, "My name is Jake and I am this and this and this." Classic grounding techniques. Unfortunately, he does say "my name is Jake" aloud, which makes someone look at him a little bit funny. I cleared my throat. My host, I said. Sometimes I still have trouble, controlling him. The craft stopped again. "Medicine," the computer voice declared. "They have pills for that now," Yellow Suit answered. "You should visit the clinic." A dangerous future indeed, where the hosts cannot even resist the Yeerk control. I forgot to say that Jake is wearing an orange jumpsuit, and at the end of the line, another woman in an orange jumpsuit gets off at a stop named Research and Development. She's confused as to why Jake isn't getting off, but he says something about going to the clinic to sort his Yeerk out. No, host. Yes. The craft heads down and Jake looks out over what's left of Central Park, which is mostly built over now, except for a small patch where there are Andalites feeding. Captive Andalites, of course. At last, the craft docks. I didn't know what world this was. I didn't know what time this was. A world before or after or parallel to mine. A bizarre reality that had somehow imposed itself on the one I was used to accepting. All wonderful options. Let's discover together which is correct. I'm sure the book will tell us. Maybe, somehow, Jake is the last person left, the last free person anyway, and this is his chance to fix things. We got 2/3 of a book left to figure out these things. Jake steps into Times Square, which he describes as being sort of like if all the world leaders just gave up and decided to destroy everything. Things are very different at ground level to up in the sky. All the billboards are now advertising for people to go back to the Yeerk homeworld. At the bottom, in smaller print, were the words, "High Council Division for the Relocation of Unfit and Insurrectionist Hosts." These words were sprayed over by the graffiti tag, EF. Intriguing. This could mean there's some kind of rebellion, some kind of resistance group that Jake can join. He starts to theorise as to where the others would be or could be, which makes no sense to me because I think I would default assume that everyone was a Yeerk until proven otherwise. But again, I have no real sense of what the Yeerks would want to do after they'd conquered the world, as so far the answers seem to be wear jumpsuits and work. Oh, and have space toilets, of course. Machine gun fire, and Jake hits the ground as he hears Drakenbeam firing back. The gunfire fades away, and then there are Taxxons heading straight for Jake, and he desperately needs to get out of the way because a Taxxon isn't going to stop and think. And then he hears the cry of a raptor overhead and looks up and sees a kind of old-looking, dingy hawk. Could it be? Unfortunately, seeing the raptor makes Jake step out of hiding and the Taxxons see him. He runs for the subway, a sensible decision, except that as soon as he's underground he can smell more Taxxons. And then he's very shocked when someone asks, "Who are you?" A guy, a human, only 3 feet tall, but an adult, looked up at me quizzically. He whipped the stack of flyers he was carrying behind his back. I thought I saw the letters EF, but I wasn't sure. He then tells Jake that he won't last long down here. No one does. Then they both hear the Taxxons heading their way, and Jake follows the boy as they run. We emerged into a wide domed hall with a stagnant, toxic puddle at its centre. Clustered around this shallow, filthy water, cramped and miserable, was a sampling of human and alien life. A horrific sampling. But it is nice to revisit some of the species we've met. There are Geds, there are humans, there are Andalites, all generally not having a very good time. Finally, Jake has the chance to ask, "Who are you?" The little guy interrupted his whispers of reassurance to a group of human kids. "Depends who you ask," he says. "The Emperor calls us fugitives. The EF calls us refugees. I call us casualties. Casualties of the fitness policy. But it doesn't really matter, does it? We're all prey." He observes Jake and sees his body is basically fine, so assumes that Jake must be mentally ill. To be fair, based on what's going on with Jake, I don't think he has an argument against that right now, but that's not what's really happening. One of the things that people who are living in the subway right now have to deal with is Taxxon patrols. Jake makes to go out on his own, but whoever this is says, "There's no chance you'll survive if you head off there. Stop and wait." Jake tries to get away, but ends up being pulled towards the edge of the subway line, which seems to be sort of like a writhing mass of Taxxons. It's generally fairly horrible. Some Taxxons escape whatever suction is pulling them along through this transport system, and they start approaching Jake, who is also in danger of being sucked into the transport system. Jake manages to escape, only minorly chomped on by a Taxxon, and flops onto the pavement on the surface, glad that he is not at least alone. The delight is ruined somewhat when someone speaking in run-on sentences asks him what on earth he is doing in the ghetto. The book's words, not mine. "I was looking at blue lungs that filled and deflated with speech, and 2 bright green hearts pumping pale yellow blood through crystal clear veins. Miles of intestines coiled tightly near a swath of faintly reddish muscle. Their skin was as clear as glass or water. Clearer, since there was next to no distortion as I stared at the organs beneath." I mean, at this point, throw in a heap more weirdness. Why not? The whatever it is tells Jake that he should be at his worksite and that truancy is a crime. Jake finally looks at the badge on his jumpsuit and learns that he is a planetary engineer who should be working at the Chrysler building. There's booms and clouds of dust happening, but the whatever it is keen to take Jake into custody. So Jake makes a break for it as something else explodes, but he doesn't really get very far. Presumably due to the fact that he's recently been bitten by a Taxxon, of which there are now oodles streaming up onto the streets. Jake for the first time tries to morph, and as he is doing so witnesses a building toppling down in an explosion. Again, I have to reference when this was published. Do I think this would have been written a year and a bit later? No, I do not. Jake should use this as his chance to escape, but instead he just crawls to a nearby doorway and collapses. At some point he wakes to chaos all around and Taxxons herding the injured onto transport ships, eating anyone who's already dead. Jake makes a break for it, but ends up headfirst in the barrel of a Drakenbeam. I looked past the barrel, past the arm, into the eyes of a dark female figure covered head to foot in dust. Blood dripped from her even features. As our eyes met, her expression changed. It flashed from ruthless hatred to a mysterious mix of confusion, disbelief, tenderness, and anger. I think I know who this is, but the book doesn't get into it yet, because the woman fires at a Taxxon who's approaching behind them and dashes off. Jake sprints after her. They make it into an alleyway with Taxxons in hot pursuit. He follows her into a theatre of some kind. All while Drakenbeams are lighting everything up, Taxxon explodes, everything gets a little bit nasty. The woman's still running, still being pursued by 3 Taxxons, and Jake takes it upon himself to help her by trapping them under the lighting rig. He then frees the woman from where her arm has been trapped under a Taxxon, which I imagine is fairly unpleasant. Our eyes met. Cassie. I wanted to hug her, tell her everything was okay, that she was brave, that we would make it out alive. But her eyes were like a wall, or a mask. I searched them for the peace and sensitivity they used to hold. Neither was there. Her lips curled into a fake smile, a very un-Cassie-like look, and she finally spoke. "So, you're not dead. Jake replies with something jokey about how, despite the city's best efforts, he's still kicking, but she's not here for that, instead dropping down into the orchestra pit and uncovering some kind of stash. At that point, Jake tells her that he was just in bed at 15 years old and he has no idea if this is Cryak, the Elemist, or what. Cassie ignores this and digs something out of the case, which Jake is shocked to see is explosives. Hefty ones. I take it you're not with the EF, she said. I shook my head. The Evolutionist Front? The Yeerk rebel group? You know, the so-called insurrectionists dedicated to turning away from parasitism and towards the use of artificially created symbiotes? Interestingly, that's what the Iskut were doing in that book that we read ages ago where I thought that was as weird as it was gonna get. And Cassie is actually a member of this group. She has a Yeerk in her head right now, but they are allied. She was also the one who set those explosives, but she was trying to take down the Chrysler building. Things didn't quite go to plan. Jake's really confused as to why Cassie of all people would do something that would lead to loss of life. This is not the Cassie we know from our timeline, and she eventually says, well yeah, I don't care about that anymore. Essentially, not in those words, but pretty much. Jake tries to get her to remember her last battle, and at this point I started to think, oh, is this It's a Wonderful Life, but for consoling your friends? The Taxons own the subway, I said. The Orf, which is the creature that we met before, rule the streets. Cassie, if you look around, it's obvious that somehow we lost our chance to win this war. The war is not lost, she hissed. Her eyes were on fire. She looked ready to attack me, but then her eyes moved to the badge on my chest, and all at once her anger vanished. Her face relaxed, then brightened. Her expression changed so quickly it was frightening. Because yes, Cassie's very excited to learn that Jake is supposed to be working on the Chrysler building project. So the Yeerks, and this is just a fantastic plan, they want to turn the moon into a big Kandrona ray emitting thing. That way the Earth can be nice and Kandrona-y forever and no one will be able to ever stop them. And the balloon that is over the Chrysler building is the beam that's gonna do that. The person who ghost wrote this, whose name I have written down, Ellen Guru, also wrote the book where Tobias got tortured that time, so we know she can bluff technology. Jake asks where the others are, but Cassie says he's not gonna like the answer. Okay, so apparently Cassie was betrayed by Jake, who was turned into a controller because his brother Tom found out that he was one of the Animorphs. Jake, Marco, and Axe, yes, all get captured in Cassie's barn. They killed Rachel, they captured Cassie, and Tobias escaped. I think that's the basic scenario. Before Jake can even properly comprehend this and mourn Rachel, another Taxon shows up. Cassie shoots the Taxon, but not to kill, which is interesting. But no time to think about that as they escape into a crawl space under the stage. And then Cassie does kill the Taxon, so it wasn't really that much. It wasn't that deep. They're just dogs, she said. The Orf's unofficial police squad let loose to catch us so-called terrorists. The Orf don't mind too much if Taxon hunger gets out of control and they eat us instead of bringing us to the station. An eye for an eye, I say. They flee into the street where things are still pretty chaotic, Cassie firing behind them as they go. Jake sees a newspaper, which is odd because it's the one that his dad just recently got delivered. Yeah, everything went bad pretty quickly after the Animorphs were stopped, which is nice because it kind of validates what the Animorphs were doing, but on the other hand, still kind of depressing. So we finally get an update on where everyone is, and I'm going to consult my notes for this. Axe is a high-ranking controller who helped the Yeerks to conquer the Andalite homeworld. Tobias is some kind of anti-Yeerk leader, and Marco is now Visser 2, in charge of Earth and doing terrible things, and everyone's favourite villain Visser 3 is now in charge of everything as the Yeerk supreme leader. No, Cassie's Yeerk was feeding me lies. She was wearing me down. She knew from Cassie's memory what would get to me, what could make me snap. Jake snaps. He heads down the street saying free or die to himself, which is probably very healthy and fine. Cassie gets him to stop saying it's Kismet. He is a planetary engineer in the Chrysler building project and she wants to stop the Yeerks turning the moon into a Kandrona ray. It's still funny. They want to turn the Yeerks' controlled burn into an uncontrolled one and blow up the moon so the Yeerks can never use it, and it's still hilarious. I feel like blowing up the moon would end the world, but okay. More importantly, Cassie mentions free humans, which gets Jake interested. Apparently there are some groups of humans in the countryside who do not have Yeerks in their heads. Cassie instructs Jake to live as his badge suggests to get some intel, and she will be back with a plan. So they'll know that it's Jake and not a Yeerk. They agree on a code word, which Jake thinks should be peace. It's too late for peace, Jake. All that's left now is to drive the invaders away by force, make Earth too dangerous for them. How about a different code word? How about Animorphs? Is Jake a mere tool for future Cassie to use? Perhaps, but he can still try to save her. Jake hops on a shuttle and finally makes it to work at the Chrysler building. He's not super happy about not being able to give the orders here, but hey, he's working on it. He makes it to his work crew, which includes some humans, an Andalite, and some kind of pink creature we haven't met yet. Figured you had abandoned us for the homeworld, the Andalite teased. Had to visit the clinic. Problems with my host. He has a rebellious history. You can say that again. As they go up in the lift, they can see the destruction that the EF have caused, and one of the crew remarks that the EF seem to be getting stronger. You're just in time for this afternoon's group efficiency workshop, piped up another of the humans. Peer communication skills. Conquest through companionship. I appreciate that this is awful for everyone on Earth, but I am really liking seeing what a Yeek world would be like, and it does seem that they're going to conferences. Jake heads through the sea of cubicles, a few people greeting him and saying, hey, are you excited for the launch? It's the big night. So yeah, it seems like it's time for the launch already. They're not doing a practice, they're doing the real thing. Thank goodness he's wearing a badge with all the information about where his cubicle is. I assume the Yeeks just aren't very good at remembering things. A computer shows up with a big model of the Chrysler building surrounded by numbers. It's all very complicated, and this is a nightmare I've had where you are given a job and you don't know how to do it. I looked around. Everyone else had silver probes hung on their ears. There was one on my desk. It looked like a tape dispenser, but I picked it off the console and fit it to my ear. Looked at the monitor, and suddenly, whoa, the 3D model flashed. The image was uncontrollable, unstoppable. My brain was panicking, racing. I tried to mask the monitor from view so that my cubicle neighbours wouldn't sound the imposter alarm. He manages to get control of the console before anyone notices that anything is amiss, except that there's a communal workstation nearby and all of Jake's team saw him fail to use the screen. He plays it off as like, oh, I'm just a bit tired from the clinic this morning, guys. It's all fine. And he looks back to the screen only to see the raw, bloody, dismembered bodies of enemies I'd faced in battle. My past was staring back at me. That's not good. That's not good at all. He can hear a chanting in his brain as all these weird murdery scenes play out. It's just going, Jake, Jake, Jake. Even David, that sucky kid who got trapped as a rat forever, gets a mention. At last it all falls away and Jake is back in the real world-ish, staring at his cubicle, with his whole team looking at him very weirdly. Security are making their way through the cubicles, led by yet another blast from the past. Head of security is Jake's father, obviously now a controller. You were late for work, the Yeek in my father's head accused. Late and in the vicinity of the explosion. You will be interrogated. Sensible detective work from the Yeeks. Jake tries to fight off one of the Orf, but it's hard to combat someone when you don't really understand how their body works. He's blocked in by security and at last manages to get to Morph, Tiger Morph this time. The Yeeks are stunned by this, as obviously they think only Andalites can morph. Can Jake take down his own father? We don't get that far, as Jake is knocked out from behind. Jake wakens in his human form, which is good because he's not trapped as a tiger, but bad because how did he get here and how did he demorph? He's also stuck in a bare room with nowhere to go, and when he tries to step out of the door, he gets electrocuted. Now who should step up to gloat and ask why Jake's doing this? Why, it's everyone's favourite villain, Visser 3. No, it's Visser 2, Marco. There's a moment where Visser 2 lets Marco speak because he's vindictive like that, but Marco doesn't get more out than no. Visser 2 says he's got a nice new Yeek lined up for Jake that's going to fix all of these issues, which tells us that Visser 2 just thinks Jake is a malfunctioning controller, not that he's done some space travel, time travel, portal, wormhole thing. I knew I wasn't. I knew it. And yet when everyone thinks you're something you're not, when everyone tells you again and again who and what you are, it's hard to not wonder way in the back of your mind if they aren't somehow right. Relevant thoughts. Visser 2 interrogates Jake as to whether he was involved in the explosion, which of course he wasn't, so he can answer honestly. Unfortunately, they bring in a cuffed Cassie who fights them to no avail. Jake is going to morph to try and save her, but she makes intense eye contact and he opts not to. He tells Marco, look, I have no idea about any groups who are involved with any explosions. Marco, to add to the stress and torture of the situation, has brought in a top-tier Taxon who has been kicked out of his own Taxon hive for eating everyone. They don't even need to infest this Taxon with a Yeek. He's bad enough on his own. Help us infiltrate the EF, Marco propositioned smoothly, and her life will be spared. Tell me all you know, and tell him nothing, Cassie snarled. I'd sooner die 1,000 Taxon deaths than aid the Empire. But even looking at this time-hardened Cassie, Jake can only remember the friend he left behind. So even though she is screaming for him not to do so, Jake says he'll tell the Yeeks all he knows. While gloating, Marco says something like, this is exactly the kind of slip-up that led me to be Visser 3. But we know that Marco is actually Visser 2. This is the first kind of glitch that leads Jake to start to think this might be a dream. Marco laughed. Dream? Reality? Can you tell the difference? Are you so sure there even is a difference? Pain is pain, fear is fear. If I order this Taxon to eat you now, you'll feel agony beyond imagining. Call it a dream if you want, but it'll be real enough. I mean, yes, but one of those you get to wake up after. Jake doesn't come to that conclusion about dreams, and instead tells Marco everything he knows about the EF and their plan to blow up the Chrysler building. No, he doesn't have the details, but hey, I figure this is bad enough. Marco turns on Cassie, saying, you'll give up the information, but she spits in his face because she's iconic. He tells Jake to go back to work and wait for contact from the EF. They'll trap them that way. We'll be watching. Marco's voice was faint now. Every step you take, Jake, buddy. Jake wakes up, not back in time, but back at his work console. Another weird time skip. His own work crew have already left, which is great because it means he doesn't have to explain his little power nap. Dreams within nightmares, within hallucinations, within visions? It was debilitating. You're telling me I've had to try and explain it in a video. He follows the other controllers out into the city, the lively above-ground city, not the grimy downstairs part. Much of the crowd was human. Evidently, the Yeeks understood the human need for leisure time, and for junk food. Interesting, Jake piles up a plate and gets ready to tuck in. He then gets body slammed by a Hawkbajir who tells him he's a friend and a member of the EF. He tells Jake where to go and, shoving a taco in his mouth, Jake makes his way into one of the empty kitchens. He can hear breathing, the kind that comes from not particularly healthy lungs. And then he sees a woman in a wheelchair, very, very disfigured and not recognisable to him until she says the word Animorph. Yep, Rachel wasn't dead at all. She was just injured, very much so, and has been working secretly ever since. She had been so badly hurt. I wanted to ask how. Why didn't she morph to repair the damage? But I was afraid of the answer. I knew it was my doing. I knew I'd finally wasted Rachel's life. Ugh. I'm getting very tired. When do we get back to reality? She instructs Jake both not to show her pity and to take a nice circuitous route to the library where they can meet and discuss things. And Orf then comes into the kitchen to ask what on earth Jake is doing, and he plays it off as saying, hey, I just wanted some more salsa, as Rachel slinks back into the shadows. Jake's lying is still not great, but again, this works. Following Rachel's instructions, Jake makes his way through the city, trying to lose the Orfs that are following him. He tries to morph, but either something's going wrong or he just lacks focus. I don't know. I don't understand it either. Jake catches sight of the 5 Orf that are currently tailing him. He tries to run through the city, but the Orf are tailing him too well, so he has to run inside. He dives into a sports equipment store nearby, and because this book cannot stop, he falls through the floor, some kind of hole, and down into a chamber beneath. He can hear children singing, and he lands in a field of some kind. There are adults sitting under the tree in linen outfits, like some kind of midsummer event. I would be saying red flag right now, but Jake goes on with it. They all look at Jake, and one of the Andalites steps up. With it we walk, think, and speak. For it we breathe, sleep, and work. Freedom guides us, everyone answered. For it we live. Freedom is all. Okay, so apparently the floor hole won't open up for just anyone, so Cassie must want Jake to see this. I honestly can't tell if it's because I just made these notes while I was an incredibly warm day in my office, or if this is just that weird. Okay, so the Yeeks are growing human hosts, as in children, in laboratories, pumping them full of vitamins and stuff, everything they need to grow. The EF are freeing those children and bringing them here to heal and, you know, feel better. And it seems to be working. I mean, Jake meets one of the children called Justice, because they all have conceptual names. I will spare you the very on-the-nose page and a half of art therapy. There's a border between lightness and darkness and people climbing on a rope. It's all very obvious, but you know, it's there. Justice tells Jake that he's gonna be late, so he shoves him out of a door, and when Jake turns back, there's like a oak tree in the way and he can't get back in, and things are very, very odd. The plus side to this is that by falling through the floor, Jake has lost his tail and can now make his way to the library. Here's the call of a hawk, but Tobias doesn't answer, if it is Tobias at all. When he arrives at his destination, he sees a noble Andalite warrior. It's Elfangor. Have we come full circle back to book 1? We'd better get some answers soon. He's very confused as to how Elfangor can simultaneously be dead, having been eaten by Visser 3, and also be the leader of the EF. He tells him he wants to go back to stop all of this from happening, but Elfangor is dubious. It's all your fault, I said suddenly, surprising myself. I always thought of you as a hero, Elfangor, a leader. But the truth is you couldn't see another way out. You sentenced us to hardship, pain and suffering. We were kids. You made us question every value we ever learned. You had no right to heap that weight on us. Huge and impossible, you used us. A confrontation we should have seen coming, because Jake has been cross about this for a while. Okay, so it's revealed that it isn't actually Elfangor, it is Tobias, but obviously he had Axe's morph, aged up, looks a lot like Elfangor. And Tobias is now a Nothet Andalite, which is fine. And also Tobias then reveals that Jake is actually dead. Trust me, it doesn't make sense to me either. 10 years ago tonight, Tom put it all together. He came into your room and murdered the leader of the Animorphs, rather than let Visser 3 know that one of the notorious Andalite bandits had gone undetected for so long, right under his nose. Tom ended your life. Your own brother. So Jake is alive, but not alive. There's a convergence of all these things, and the moon is going to explode. And because Jake was the most scientific one of all of them, he was the one who programmed the moonbeam. Only Jake can change the programming of the moonbeam to make it blow up the moon instead of... Okay, Jake wants to save Cassie, but Tobias says she would have preferred to die honourably. Sacrifices have to be made, he says, and then he says a fantastic sentence. Alter the moon ray or save Cassie. One or the other. Or neither. Not both. There are only 4 chapters left of this book. I need to stand up because I have terrible pins and needles. I will return. Jake runs out into the night where there are now loads of leaves on the trees where before it was barren. This is all very confusing, both for him and for me. He's torn up by guilt or confusion, which we've seen a lot in these books. Should he choose the greater good or try and save his friend? Before he can dig too far into that existential crisis, Jake gets shot at by a dragon beam, which means Marco's men are back on his tail. He manages to morph to Falcon and get out of there. Does he save one person, Cassie, and doom the rest of humanity to Yikdom? Only 3 chapters left to decide. He has a emotional, spiritual moment flying over the city and seeing all of the people in servitude to the Yiks. As he watches the laser part of the moon ray begins to ignite, there's no time left. He spies Cassie, who has for some reason been strapped to the outside of the building. Somehow, in human form, she can thought speak and she tells Jake he needs to smash the spire, or to knock it out of alignment enough to throw off the beam's calculations. The ray activates before Jake can make a decision. He sees Cassie struggle out of her bonds and she manages to knock the spire askew. That's the word I'm looking for. Askew. Jake cheers, but Cassie stops him. I only misaligned an auxiliary stabilizer. The systems will be up and running again in minutes. A panel opens up behind her, revealing an Orph who drags her inside. There's no option. To stop this, Jake needs to disable the main computers. He flies through the tiny opening to this Yik fortress, struggling to stay conscious through all of the various different barriers he hits, including literally flying into a wall. He demorphs just about and tries to get to Tiger in order to destroy the doors to the computer room that he needs to get into, where obviously Visser 2 will be. There are 30 seconds until the beam goes off, and to top it off, Marco Visser 2 is going to end this plan by throwing Cassie off the tower. Tiger Jake fights the troops and Marco, but much like at the start of the book, they are hopelessly outnumbered. 13 seconds to go and Cassie is thrown off the building. Jake is being taken down by the forces, but he can see Cassie's hand holding onto the ledge. He could still save her! With the small amount of freedom he manages to get, does he go and grab Cassie's hand, or does he go and press the big button that will stop the moon launch? Moonbeam launch. I knew what I had to do. No time for indecision. I saw my goal. Save what should be valued above all else. I leaped. 5, 4, and then a voice says, interesting choices, and I thought we were finally going to get some answers. It was not the Alarmist. No, it was a voice I'd never heard. They have strangely segmented minds, conscious, unconscious, and an ability to reconcile both. They will bear more study, these humans. He can hear birds, and he opens his eyes to see his normal posters on his wall. He is a child again. First things first, Jake picks up the phone and dials, waiting for her to answer, reliving all he's experienced. It's Jake, I said. No response. It's Jake, I said again, voice quaking like I'd never talked to her before, as if this were the first call I'd ever made, the only call that mattered. Cassie, I just wanted to ask what I should have asked you yesterday. Are you okay? And then the book ends, and let me tell you, they never tell you the answer. They never tell you what was going on, where this dream sequence came from, who delivered it. I checked on the wiki. They never explain it. If they explain it in a side book, please tell me below. I don't want to read it, I just want to know what happens. I'm so cross. And that was the incredibly confusing Animorphs 41, which brings Animorphs August to a close. I know this only had 3 August Animorphs videos, but honestly, I'm very pleased with how they all went. They were very, very weird, and Animorphs 42 is no less odd, so get hyped up for that, which will be coming to your screens in a couple of weeks, or possibly early if you are on Patreon. As ever, if you would like to discuss all things Animorphs, you can do so on my Discord, which is linked below, as is my Twitter and aforementioned Patreon if you want early access to videos and exclusive content. Thank you so much for watching. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one.
There's gonna be some bloopers now.
Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. Please excuse the dog. She just needs some attention while I do the intro. I don't know why you want attention right now. I told you no. Not today. Go. The so-called insurrectionists dedicated to... Ooh, please go away notification. I have pins and needles.